Roderick A. Elmheim stood atop a hill piled with corpses, his entire body emanating a thick aura of bloodshed. Gazing toward the distant white snowfield, he identified the person before him as Ash. He then turned his head slightly and questioned why Ash was present, stating that he distinctly remembered entrusting him with the expedition to conquer the East. Clutching his wounded arm, his face smeared with blood, Ash responded with barely restrained fury that he had come for the sole purpose of striking Roderick down. The moment those words were uttered, Roderick's eyes flared with crimson light as he stared back at him. Facing his adoptive father with a blood-stained sword in hand, Ash accused him of having intended from the very beginning to use his unit as a decoy and discard them once they had served their purpose, asking bitterly whether that assessment was wrong. With golden eyes filled with hatred, Ash addressed him as his father. Roderick frowned, clearly displeased, and coldly replied that such a fate was the only purpose of a wingless existence like Ash, deriding him as a foolish son. He then spoke Ash's full name with deliberate emphasis. Ash's thoughts drifted to the crimson family crest of the House of Elmheim, the continent's foremost military lineage that had long pledged its sword to protect the royal family. He recalled how the head of that house, Roderick A. Elmheim, had been revered as the sole bearer of the 7 wings in the entire country. He remembered the image of Roderick standing tall beneath the family emblem, seated in the seat of authority, and then another memory surfaced, of Roderick rescuing him on a whim when he had been a dying infant abandoned in a blizzard beside a woman. Ash reflected that it was precisely because of that act that he had spent his entire life doing everything he could to repay that debt. Yet another memory followed, of himself lying collapsed on the ground, blood covering his face, a shattered wooden sword by his side, while his 2 brothers stood nearby, laughing mockingly. He recalled how, in their youth, they had ridiculed him, declaring that a wingless person without even a crest had no right to overestimate himself. Ash concluded bitterly that he had lacked the wings necessary to repay his father. His thoughts turned to the wing crests engraved upon Roderick's back, and the belief that the more wings one possessed, the greater the magical power hidden within. He reflected with anguish that as the only member of the ducal house incapable of using magic, he had been labeled wingless by his brothers. Even so, Ash had done nothing but desperately cling to his sword. He remembered how he had trained relentlessly with wooden stakes, how he had stripped himself bare and performed endless push-ups until sweat pooled on the ground, and how he had continued strengthening his body even through storms and violent rain, driven solely by the belief that one day such devotion would be rewarded. That belief led him to the present battlefield, where he had fought alongside his 2 brothers in a snowy forest. He recalled hiding behind a tree, carefully watching his surroundings, until all 3 of them were shocked by the sudden appearance of numerous enemy forces. Someone had cried out in disbelief that they were being ambushed. Returning to the present, Ash questioned Roderick, saying that he had followed him and believed in him until this very moment, and demanded to know whether this betrayal was the answer he had been given. Roderick looked down at him with blood-red eyes, regarding him as nothing more than an insect, and replied that a mere tool like Ash had no right to expectations, ordering him to leave immediately as an eyesore. Hearing those merciless words, Ash fell into silence. Then, without hesitation, he charged forward with his sword, still addressing Roderick as his father. With eyes gleaming in golden murderous intent, he swung his blade, bitterly acknowledging his own foolishness for having believed in him. He poured every last ounce of strength into that strike, lamenting that trusting Roderick had been his greatest mistake. However, the attack only left a shallow cut along the collar of Roderick's clothing, prompting Roderick to sneer in disdain. At that moment, Ash's 2 brothers used magic to conjure crimson chains that bound his body completely. Their eyes shone with cruel amusement as they swung their swords, severing one of Ash's arms and one of his legs. Bound and assaulted from all sides, Ash spat out a mouthful of blood. As he collapsed face first into the snow, his eldest brother mocked him, remarking that Ash still failed to understand his place, sneering that a wingless being was destined for such an end. Standing together with Roderick, the second brother added that someone like Ash was best suited to crawl on the ground like that. Clenching his remaining hand, Ash trembled with rage, and weakly questioned why he had ever been picked up if he was only meant to be discarded in the end. Roderick then squatted in front of him and coldly told him not to flatter himself, stating that he had never had any use for Ash from the very beginning. Grabbing Ash by the hair and forcing his head up, Roderick revealed through clenched teeth that what had truly mattered was the power of the 7 wings residing within Ash's body. Confused, Ash questioned what Roderick meant by the 7 wings. Roderick released him and mockingly replied that Ash's mother had been truly useful. Turning away, he added that she had given birth to a seed like Ash solely for his sake. As Roderick's back gradually disappeared into the distance, Ash desperately reached out and begged him to wait, demanding to know what he was talking about. Meanwhile, his 2 brothers raised their swords high above him, killing intent surging, while Ash continued to plead for answers. After an indeterminate amount of time, Ash's vision blurred and he became aware of a single hand lying in a pool of blood, sensing only the cold. Struggling to open his fading eyes, he wondered whether this was where he would die. Watching the snow fall endlessly from the sky, Ash questioned, in the depths of his fading consciousness, what he had truly been living for all this time. Suddenly, the church bells began to ring. Wrapped in swaddling clothes, the boy silently assessed his situation, sensing that everything around him was white and faintly warm, and wondering whether this was the afterlife, or perhaps snow. Moments later, Ash let out a loud sneeze. Widening his round eyes in confusion, he quickly realized that it was not the afterlife at all, but reality itself. As the bells continued to echo, he discovered that he was lying in the arms of a woman, which made him jolt in shock as he wondered where on earth he was. When he tried to move his foot, he questioned the tiny body he was inhabiting. Raising his small finger, he doubted whether it truly belonged to him, noting that it was unmistakably the body of an infant. Only then did Ash panic upon realizing that he had become a complete baby. After some time, once he had reluctantly accepted this reality, he began to look around. Seeing the woman holding him, Ash quietly speculated whether she was dead. At that moment, when he instinctively triggered a search, clusters of small, golden lights appeared. Through them, Ash saw a group of people on horseback galloping through the snow, shouting that the woman had to be found at all costs, insisting that in such a blizzard she could not have fled very far. The captain, frowning deeply, shouted to the soldiers behind him that for Lord Roderick's sake they had to recover the infant she had taken. When the golden lights gradually faded, Ash was so terrified that cold sweat broke out all over his body. Thinking about the name Roderick, he was inwardly shaken, questioning what had just happened and whether they had truly mentioned Lord Roderick. He realized with dread that the man was after the baby, and immediately associated that baby with himself, wondering if they were searching for him. His golden eyes widened in fear as he recalled having heard that he himself had once been picked up on a snowy night just like this. That memory made him suspect the absurd possibility that he had returned to the past, even though the idea felt utterly ridiculous. When the golden lights appeared again, and the image of the horseman charging through the snow re-emerged, Ash flinched and glanced in one direction, deciding that he would confirm everything later. He then twisted his body, struggling to escape from the stiffened arms of the woman, telling himself that if he stayed there, he would inevitably fall into the hands of the ducal house. Fear transformed into motivation, and drenched in sweat, Ash stretched his hand forward. Golden spiritual energy surged from his entire body as he began crawling ahead inch by inch, gritting his teeth with determination, and telling himself that he had to get away from there as far and as quickly as possible. His tiny hand slammed against the snowy ground, causing steam to rise. As he continued crawling, he cursed inwardly, feeling his breathing grow heavy. With each movement, his hands radiated more heat, melting the snow beneath them, and he sensed that his limbs were so hot they felt as though they were burning. He had no idea how much time passed, but eventually he realized that he had carved a long trench across the snow. Encouraging himself, he resolved to survive even if he had to crawl the entire way. With his face filthy and his body soaked in sweat, he clenched his teeth and continued forward, reaffirming his determination to live. As he recalled the image of himself reaching toward Roderick's retreating back, Ash vowed inwardly that he would one day take everything from Lord Roderick. However, his vision gradually darkened, even as he continued reaching forward. In the end, his body went limp and collapsed onto the snow. Sometime later, a pair of feet stopped in front of him. A white-haired girl turned back toward the man behind her and called out to her father, indicating that she had found something. Baron Highfield frowned in shock and exclaimed in disbelief. He lifted Ash into his arms, questioning why there would be a baby in a place like this. As he looked closely at Ash, he suddenly noticed something unusual, and his eyes widened in horror as he realized that it truly was an infant. When he looked at the long path carved through the snow, Baron Highfield was stunned, wondering whether the child had really crawled such an incredible distance. Breaking out in a cold sweat, he stared at the sleeping Ash in his arms and questioned who on earth this child could be. And so, Ash was picked up by a mysterious figure, while the man continued to wonder, in utter disbelief, who this child truly was.